miles, 10 kilometres from Aveiro, you'll find Costa Nova. Praia da Costa Nova is Aveiro by the beach. Its quirky and charming seaside homes are painted in traditional striped patterns, attracting social media savvy visitors who flock to have their photos taken in front of their cheery exteriors, all along the narrow sandbar peninsula. From the lagoon, the mighty Atlantic Ocean does generate a lot of wind and a lot of rain and rough seas. You might not consider it if you're a faint-hearted Mediterranean sailor. The inner rows of the long grid of streets along the peninsula are a little bit more sheltered, and the restaurants tend to face the lagoon rather than take the buffeting of the very strong sea breezes. Palheiros houses. Palheiros, the colourful beach houses, were originally constructed by fishermen to store their equipment. There's the long, pristine sand beach, with sand dunes and seagulls galore. Passadicos, Costa Nova, is a raised boardwalk footpath that connects to Costa Nova to Praia de Barra, which provides a scenic 6-kilometre walking route to the Farol de Barra. Since 1893 has been the tallest lighthouse in Portugal. Costa Nova is rightly and understandably a popular surfing location, but it's the Palheiros that really don't disappoint. The whole village is like it. They are not weather dependent. The weather and climatic conditions don't have to combine to make them an incontournable, as we say in France. But having said that, sunshine helps. Oh, don't miss Aveiro and its canals, even its shopping centre, which perhaps in part to encouraging ventilation and cooling has some architectural merit beyond what you might initially expect. Vernacular architecture can, in its best instances, capture something of the haunting and celestial quality of the sea, but here along the functional linear grid of the spit, the amalgam of fishermen's huts and beach huts built by their owners for their immediate needs. These colourful buildings act as a reflection to that awe of the sea. Portuguese fishing boats are well known for being very colourful and individually so, which helps, like a tattoo, to individualise and say this is my boat and my property, with the decoration of what used to be called the noble savage, as deep and meaningful as naming the boat after your mother or your daughter. To each of those individuals, but their industry requires service space, and the very functional service space of the fisherman's hut close to the sea, again identified and linked to their boat by the same pigmentation style and embellishment. These were once statements of pride, and I suppose still are, that seafront architecture that elevate local profile, drive regeneration and increase tourism. They have a power almost as strong as the waves that the original boats occupied as islands of safety, surrounded by hazard. But now this linear grid of streets mostly portrays a less stunning degree of architectural ingenuity, lavishing adoration on the functionary beachside facilities. Many of them are putting their own layer of, let's call it ingenuity, on top. Oh, not vertical, horizontal, not horizontal, vertical. But it's almost a deconstructivism, a disrespect to the original vernacular architecture and the passion of the survivalist seafarers. It's an arrogance almost. It's so postmodern to know the rules but turn them on their head. But we should be so thankful that the original beach huts, not quite in the same Victorian striped, colourful beach huts for changing for the first holiday makers of the Victorian era in England, but we should be so grateful for the predilection of decoration that the noble savage fisherman has. as a break from the brutalism of what makes up most of Portugal's built form, and has rather excessive overdependence on brutalism in Portugal's new architectural expression. I'm one of the biggest fans of form follows function, but there's certainly room for frivolity as well. And when that apparent frivolity has such a deep and rich functional past, it's difficult not to laud it. Stripes are often associated with qualities like boldness, professionalism, and it's a classic and timeless style. They can convey a sense of structure, formality, and sophistication. Polka dots are often seen as playful, whimsical, and fun. They can convey a sense of creativity, individuality, and a more light-hearted or retro style. Deconstructivism gives the impression of the fragmentation of the constructed building, commonly characterised by the absence of obvious harmony, continuity or symmetry. The vernacular of the alternately painted boards of a colour and a white, this can be taken vertically or horizontally, and it's like a first step of deconstructing the vernacular. A whole seaside town of striped deconstructed vernacular is a different context to a red and white striped townhouse that ruffled feathers. London's Kensington, garish decoration style, but stripes have a noble, if checkered, history. In London in 2015, it was an act of retaliation done under the cover of night. The candy-coloured paint job intended to make neighbours furious who were objecting to a planning permission to extend the basement to 2 levels down. Candy stripes are vertical, very different to the horizontal emphasis brickwork of Victorian train stations in many colours, in neo-Gothic style. Striped architecture is usually reserved for important civic or sacred buildings. Stripes were employed in Roman times and have appeared throughout Western architecture ever since. They are commonly associated with the medieval churches of northern and central Italy, including the spectacular cathedrals of Siena and Orvieto. It was this Italian tradition that inspired the polychrome banded masonry of Victorian architecture. Celebrated by John Ruskin and so loved by William Butterfield and his contemporaries. Stripes have also had frequent use in much postmodern architecture, most notably that of James Stirling and Mario Botta. San Giovanni Battista in Mognos, Switzerland. The use of stripes in a domestic context forms a distinct narrative within the broader architectural tradition. Recent striped houses have been variously motivated, but like the Kensington townhouse, often end up attracting public attention while irritating the people next door. Madonna, for example, made headlines after provoking hostile neighbour relations when, in 1998, she painted her newly purchased Mulholland Drive home in red and cream stripes. Cited below the Hollywood sign, the 1920s Spanish colonial revival style, Castillo de Lago, by architect John Delario, is famous for being the home of former gangster Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, and his clandestine casino. The renovation was undertaken by Madonna's self-taught designer brother, Christopher Chicone, with the intention of recreating the stripes of a Portofino church he had visited with his sister some years earlier. He effectively turned the Spanish-style home Italianate, but here, removed from their neoclassical origins, the stripes take on a different function, asserting Madonna's public identity as a provocative celebrity, while simultaneously adorning a privacy-protecting wall while invading your visual. This was not the first time stripes had been used on the private home of a celebrity. Adolf Loos famously proposed a black and white striped design on his unbuilt house for Josephine Baker. Academies have debated the meaning of those 30-centimetre high bands of alternating black and white marble ever since, but Loos' design continues to evade explanation. This semantic uncertainty is characteristic of many architectural stripes, but what is interesting about their use on this house is that much of the speculation ties them to the race and ethnicity of Josephine Baker.
In 400 metres, turn...
More precisely, the stripes have been portrayed as a kind of exoticising, decorative slip-up by one of modernism's most ardent opponents of ornament, presumably distracted by a lustful fascination with his beautiful and famous client. But as in the case of Madonna's house, the exterior, striped, like the camouflage of a zebra, functions both to reveal and conceal the identity of the inhabitant, and so the facade takes the place among les oeuvres of secretive mask-like designs. En masse, here at the seaside, it's conforming, with some pedantic rebellion, in a transition from horizontal to vertical. The attention the Kensington striped house of 2015 received reinforces this curious strand in the history of architectural stripes, combining domestic construction, celebrity culture, and visual ostentatiousness. What is surprising, however, is the historical context of striped architecture is the intensity of offence and outrage that these stripes have caused in an otherwise quiet London street. Of course, stripes have never been universally liked. Concerning the Italian practice of often high contrasting zebra stripes, Robert Willis observed in 1835 that a practice more destructive of architectural grandeur can hardly be conceived, yet the Italians are even now so enamoured of it that in parts of the buildings where it has been omitted, the black stripes have actually been supplied with paint upon whitewash. Summerson that you'd study at college forever cemented a view of Butterfield's banded design for All Saints Margaret Street, London, as being at once brilliant, jarringly discordant, and aggressively ugly. But I'm giving you selective and relatively recent views that ignore the visual pleasure and gratification provided by stripes. John Ruskin wrote at length about his attraction to horizontal lines, their nobleness, ocular charm, and enduring delight. By contrast, Street, of less notoriety than John Ruskin, sought the richness and warmth of colour that stripes give his architecture, highlighting the sensual pleasure of polychromatic banded materials. This pleasure of stripes is also a factor in their spectacle. They usefully draw attention through their prominence in our visual field and entertain the eye with their shifting patterns, combinations of colour and ocular effects that can distract from that ugly little area that you haven't quite been able to solve or resolve. John Ruskin, The Baptistery, Florence, watercolour, 1872. There's interest created in just blank areas of wall with no penetration at all. So while some find stripes too demanding or offensive, for others stripes are not only attractive, they're more highly desirable in their southern Swiss canton of Ticino, the residence region that shares much of its border and culture with northern Italy. There's a strong peasant tradition of striped houses, painted in bold bands of colour. These houses are decorated, and not out of spite to minimalism and blandness, but to put on a public display of care and richness on otherwise simple domestic structures, a poor kind of rustication. By contrast, in Genoa, where stripes cover many of the city's medieval churches, including the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, stripes can also be found on the private houses of the city's most prominent families, the Doria being foremost among them. The Doria use of stripes, as early as the 13th century, was for domestic purposes, was sanctioned by the city, and it's sometimes said to have marked out those families for their honourable civic deeds. If anything can be said collectively of this eclectic array of decorated houses, it might be the single observation of a pattern of stripes used for the public promotion of private agendas, for status, recognition, celebrity, and occasionally for revenge. It is in this broader history that the Kensington stripes must surely be seen, whether we like them or not. But by the seaside, in England, there's a long tradition of painting the little seaside huts that you get changed in, so the people don't peek around your towel. These seaside huts, it is de rigueur to paint them in these flamboyant colours. The public would be disappointed if they weren't. This seaside town in Portugal really must be seen as part of that English vernacular flamboyance, the tradition of the release of the free mixing of classes in a period of rare holiday. And anything that celebrates and exaggerates the vernacular has surely got to be a good thing. The ancient buildings of antiquity were coloured. They weren't minimalist stone that we see today.